a copy that I wrote. He never sought to change it, he never sought to stifle my freedom in any way. He completely fostered independent thinking and the freedom of his writers. And that is something I value today, going forward. And as an editor, the brief time I have been an editor, I think on some level I subconsciously tried to model my management of an editorial along those lines, in that despite the fact that this is a publicly owned state newspaper that I work for, I went in on certain conditions that I would not be interfered with, and that has been respected so far. And as a result of that, I have been able to give my journalists in that newsroom a degree of freedom. I continue to try to allow them to travel as much as possible. I stretch budgets for that, whatever I need to do, because I think that's the kind of reporting that really needs to be done in this country. In-depth, profound. When we go into a human rights violation case, we go into it deep. My reporters who are here know that. We go deep. And that is something I definitely learned as a leader. And I think this is also a shortfall that, the pieces I write and the pieces that I seem to get other people to write are very long. And that is also, I think, baggage from the leader, because everybody remembers those huge double spreads that you have to take the week to read, right? And 10 years later, looking back, during the October political turmoil, something suddenly struck me when I looked around at the media landscape, and the way certain publications, at least, were willing to stand up for the values of democracy, for freedom, for constitutionality, willing to kind of not cow down and toe the line that, the vast majority of the mass media were at. And when you kind of zeroed in on each of those publications, what became very clear was that each of those places had a journalist or two, maybe more, I don't know, but at least journalists in positions of authority who were trained at the Sunday Leader. And I don't know if that was intentional, because I don't know when I became who I am, but it's kind of remarkable that somehow those values that Lasantha stood for, I think, against all odds, and recklessly so, he has somehow managed to inculcate in each and every one of us that continue to write and continue to hold the line at a time when really democracy was on an ice edge in the last 2 or 3 months. And I think if Lasantha, in my editorial on Sunday, we said something similar, that had he been here this past decade, he would have been at the forefront of every one of these battles. Every battle for democracy, every battle to preserve the republic. He would have been the ones writing pages and pages, and I think that's his final legacy. That has endured. That he's gone, and they took him, but we are still here, and we will keep fighting as long as we can. So. Yeah,
thank you, Daisha. I'm going to now invite Amal, who's the bureau chief of AFP, to speak a few words. Amal, at you.
Thank you, Dina, and friends and colleagues. We're going to talk about investigative journalism, but I think we can, for the moment, drop the investigative part of it and just talk about journalism, because that's really the broader issue. It's a decade since the assassination of Lasantha, it's almost 3 decades since the killing of Richard D'Souza. But I don't know whether we still have a list of the journalist victims in these past 3 decades. I was trying to do a piece on Lasantha on 10th anniversary. That's why I was asking various media rights organizations if they had a list of journalists who had been killed. But unfortunately, I was not able to get at such a list because different organizations have different numbers. And especially if you talk about the North and East, we don't even know some of the names. So there are a few names which, like Lasantha or the disappearance of Wickrematunge. We talk about these incidents all the time, but many more journalists have been killed in this country in the last 30 years or so. But we still have not, as a journalistic community, we have not been able to get the list organized, get an idea of how many people were killed, where they were killed, and things like that. So I think there is a need right now. Maybe it's a good time to focus on this and at least try to get some names, places, so that we have a good idea of what happened in the last 3 decades. The other question is about impunity. We are always talking about journalists are killed and there's a little bit of noise for a while, and then everything is forgotten. And Richard's case is one of those. And I was just thinking, walking into this place, it struck me that we are actually meeting here just next to the house of former State Minister for Defence, Ranjan Vijay, who's linked to the assassination of Richard D'Souza. So it's a bit fitting that we're talking about even going back to 1990, when the main suspect in the assassination of Richard was the occupant of the house behind us. The other thing that I want to reflect on was the question of the journalistic community. We as journalists, what have we really done to focus on these investigations and push the authorities to make sure that these investigations are brought to a logical conclusion? If you take, for example, some of the media organizations that have been attacked, talking about Sirasa and Seattle, media organizations which were attacked, and there was a lot of noise initially, but do they keep pushing the authorities to ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice? So in case of Lasantha, a lot of us keep writing about it, but I think the international community, if you take Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, Human Rights Watch, they keep at it. They very frequently put out statements. But as Sri Lankan media organizations, we also take the same amount of interest to ensure that justice is served. So there is perhaps a need within our community to address the question of the attacks on our own colleagues, and whether we have really pushed the authorities and kept these things on the agenda, news agenda. Whenever there is a natural disaster, the tendency is for these television stations, radio stations, to have all kinds of big campaigns and get involved in that and push, try to help people, try to help victims. But when it comes to even their own organizations, your stations have been bombed, your stations have been set on fire, your journalists have been intimidated, even killed. But what have these organizations done to ensure that justice is served? So I think these are the questions when we are marking the 10th anniversary of Lasantha. These are some of the questions that we need to ask. And do the journalists, we're talking about investigative journalism, but do the journalists have even the basic protections in case they get into trouble? What are the mechanisms we have in this country today to deal with this kind of situation? Very often you will have statements, statements will be forgotten after a few weeks, but the families are left without any kind of help. There are some people who are very bravely fighting on. I'm talking about Wickrematunge's case. Sandhya has been fighting of justice for so many years, and there are a few brave people like that. But vast number of others, we don't even know them. And I happened to be at one of these media functions, and we were talking about the safety of journalists. And there was a lot of disagreement about the number of victims. The journalists in the north were saying that people in the south don't even have a clear idea of how many people have been killed. There are numbers going up to 46, 50 journalists killed in the north and east during the height of the war, and even after the conflict was over. But we are still talking about maybe 90 or 20, or the numbers keep varying. So the question is that to get some idea of what we are talking about, if we are to move forward. Then the other question is about the investigation itself. Of course, the Lal mentioned about this. The investigation was not going anywhere for about 6 years. Then with the change of government, we had some kind of there was new energy in the investigation. And what we did see is that actually the CID, for whatever it's worth, at least going by the reports that are being filed in court, they have made tremendous progress. So they have identified the killers. They have also identified people who were responsible for who were responsible for tampering with the evidence. All that has been done. I think CID, they even know who actually killed Lasantha. But what they don't know, or what they are not, what they know, but they are not able to prove at the moment, is who actually ordered his killing. I think that's really the big question that we are all waiting answers for that. But the question is, are these CID officers, is it incompetence or is it something else? It's taken 3 years, but they still haven't been able to get at the people who actually ordered the killing. So what I feel is that perhaps we need to think about not just constitutional reforms, but also the reforms in the criminal justice system. It seems the CID is able to get at, they are able to solve a lot of these cases, but there seems to be some kind of interference, obviously political interference, that is holding them back. So it seems we have a reasonably independent judiciary now, thanks to the 19th Amendment. But this judiciary is not able to function unless the investigative arm also doesn't enjoy the same level of independence. So is it time for us to make sure that the specialized investigative units of the police, I'm talking about CID, FCID, maybe other organizations which are specialist units under the police, shouldn't they also be brought under some kind of independent mechanism? If you talk about the police, yes, they are under the police commission, and in theory, they are supposed to be independent. But we all know that is not the case. So how do we actually reform the criminal justice system? Is it possible for us to go beyond what we have achieved through the 19th Amendment? Is it just enough to have independent judges, the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal? The superior courts, it seems reasonably fair that you can expect justice. But at lower courts, because most of these cases actually end up initially in the magistrate's court. So the courts of first instance, do we have the same level of independence? And do the investigators, do they have the freedom to pursue these cases? So I think these are the questions that we need to answer. And before we get on to talking about the future of journalism or future of investigative journalism, the last thing I just want to talk about is that perhaps we as a journalistic community have failed again to keep these stories alive and keep our readers informed about what's happening with these investigations. And also, there's a question of the journalistic communities may be divided on political lines and maybe for other reasons. But even if you take Lasantha as a journalist, but there is also another element to Lasantha, and that is he was a lawyer. That obviously helped him with his investigative journalism. And what did the community of lawyers do in this particular case? And I just don't want to mention names, but it's a bit surprising when I was going through some of the pictures of the funeral and reviewing some of the video footage. I realized Lasantha is based on also on what Lasantha's daughter has recently said. he was obviously killed because of his reporting on the MIG deal. And on the MIG deal, because he was very critical of individuals in the administration, there was a defamation suit against him at the Mount Lavinia courts.